Rebecca, good morning to you. How are you?
Good morning. I'm very well, thank you.
Yeah, we were just talking there about the row that has erupted around the Monaco Grand Prix and the start. Maybe talk specifically about that in a second, but the fault lines between the governing body and the sport itself, the Formula One, the sport of Formula One, it seems like this is kind of always a battle raging. Is this just the latest front on it, or is it actually something more serious and long lasting? Do you think the stuff that's going on at the moment?
I think it's quite serious, actually. There's quite a falling out happening at the moment. The FIA have a new president, Mohammed Ben Sulayem, who came in December, and his tenure so far has not been impressive. He was responsible for the investigation into the fallout from Abu Dhabi, which we obviously don't have to go over. Everyone knows what happened. That report was underwhelming, shall we say. And then there's been lots of fallings out because of this focus that the FIA have decided to go on about the jewellery ban, the underpants gates, as it's being known, making sure drivers are wearing the right underwear. And they are just focusing on the wrong things. And then, as you were saying, Monaco start was just another one of these examples of the FIA being perceived to have got it wrong and perhaps just being a bit too cautious. It's a really tricky one because obviously safety is paramount in F1. We know what happens when it goes wrong. It goes spectacularly wrong and people's lives are at risk. So they have to be careful, but they are treading on the side of being too cautious, I would say.
The start of a race seems to be something that, they've done quite a lot of over the years. You'd think a level of expertise would have evolved and developed, and yet they seem to have got it so spectacularly wrong at the weekend.
Well, this is another one of those messes from the FIA. So about 10 minutes before the race, it started raining, very light, wasn't anything, you barely needed an umbrella sort of thing. But then about 20 minutes, and at that point, they decided that they were going to postpone the start of the race. And when we spoke to Lewis Hamilton about it after the race, he just said, well, it's ridiculous. We're the 20 best drivers in the world. This excuse that the FIA came up with was because they hadn't had any wet running, so they were a bit nervous. So it was for safety reasons, as they said. Which is just, it's rubbish. Daniel Ricciardo said the same thing. We should have got underway at 3 o'clock. The rain wasn't that heavy. It was absolutely fine. And it would have produced a brilliant start because, quite frankly, Monaco is dreary at the best of times. So anything that could have spiced it up would have been welcomed. That said, at 3:20, the heavens opened and it was like a microburst. It was monsoon-like for about 10 minutes. If the race had gone ahead, it would have been red flagged. But then in all of this confusion, we're getting these messages from the FIA saying it's safety reasons and we're going to have this rolling start and it's just better being behind the safety car. But it later transpires about 2 hours after the end of the race that actually that wasn't the reason at all that we were given. It was because the rain had caused a power outage which had affected the starting lights, which meant that they couldn't actually even do a standing start. They had to do a rolling start. And then later in the race, when we had Mick Schumacher's crash and the race was red flagged and then it had to start again, they went for a rolling start again, even though we were all calling for a standing start. And we later found out it was because they weren't entirely convinced that they had sorted out the issue with the lights. And this is the sort of information you would think we would get during the race. But we weren't even really told it after the race. It was because it kind of trickled out, and we ended up finding out from Toto Wolff, actually, the Mercedes team principal. So it was farcical on the communication side as well, and no one really knew what was going on.
It's funny, one of the things that is supposed to have happened in the post-Bernie Ecclestone era is that communication is supposed to have vastly improved. And maybe it has, maybe it is still better, and this is just an example of it all going a bit pear-shaped. You're shaking your head there, so it hasn't really got better.
It doesn't feel like it's got better, no. I mean, there are certain people within the paddock who are very good at letting us know what's going on. This isn't top secret information. If there's a lot of rain and there's a power outage, it's not the FIA's fault. You'd think that would be the source of information that they would pass on. But it just doesn't occur to them to tell, not even just us in the media. No one was finding out. The drivers didn't know, so they were furious that they weren't given the opportunity for a standing start twice. It's just really bizarre. It's quite a strange way to run a sport, I think.
Is your sense that these controversies are a significant enough issue for the unbelievable momentum that the sport has had to be checked a little bit?
What do you mean? Sorry.
As in, I mean, the burst of popularity in Formula One has just been incredible. Like, is this something that could damage that and that momentum?
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly not a good look for the sport, is it? F1's confusing at the best of times. There's a lot of techie engineering that goes into it. It's not just a simple case of 20 guys jumping in a car and driving around in circles, as I know many people think. And Netflix, the Drive to Survive documentary, that has done wonders for the sport. So people are coming in. But that very much simplifies the sport, and that's very much about the drivers and their personalities, which is brilliant because we don't always get to know them very well. It's very hard when they're wearing their helmets and then they're enclosed in their machinery. You don't really get a sense of who they are. So when people come to the sport and try and watch the races, and they're told about these drivers and how they are the best in the world, and they can see a little bit of rain and people don't even have their brollies up, and they're thinking, well, why aren't we going? I don't really understand. And if we're not getting the communication, if we're not being told what's happening, it just adds further confusion. And so it's not a great look for the sport. And for these new fans, where it's pretty complicated anyway, it doesn't make them want to stick around, I imagine. And, you know, the start was delayed by 75 minutes. I can't imagine many people stuck around for the whole time.
Yeah, it's a shocking development, really, when you think about it, for a little bit of rain when, you know, we should expect inclement weather from time to time. Last thing here is really just about then the race itself for the driver's title. How straightforward will it be for the rest of the year? Is there any way that we might see Lewis Hamilton crowbar himself back into that conversation, or has that ship sailed?
I think, unfortunately, that ship has sailed. He's 75 points behind the championship leader at the moment, who is Max Verstappen. I can't really see a way past. Mercedes looked very good in Barcelona. They were always going to be terrible in Monaco. Even when they have the best car, they're always terrible in Monaco, simply because they have a very long car. It's very hard to drive a long car around a very tight, twisty track. So I think that ship has sailed. Even with George Russell, he's a bit closer, slightly more within touching distance. But it's not so much about Mercedes now. I just don't think Red Bull are going to take their eye off the ball. I don't think they're going to make the mistakes that we saw Ferrari make, which cost Charles Leclerc the win at the weekend, and also cost him the win in Spain when they had a reliability issue with their engine. I think Red Bull are just going to drive away with it, as it were. But it's a shame because we would have liked to see Mercedes in the hunt. But the thing to remember is we're in a new season of regulations, and these regulations are going to carry on. So it's really important for Mercedes to get this car right. They can't just give up and decide to switch to next year, because next year's car is based on this year's car. So it's great to see Mercedes making progress. So I think we'll have them in the title fight next year, but I think it will very much be between Ferrari and Red Bull. But we just have to keep our fingers crossed that Ferrari can sort out what looks like some issues going on. They certainly made huge mistakes, two big mistakes on Sunday, which couldn't be fixed on the track by Leclerc. And they've got some head scratching to do, I suspect, between now and the next race in Azerbaijan. And
is it your sense that we could have a proper 3-horse race next season then?
Yeah, there's no reason why not. Mercedes certainly look like they found answers to their main issues. The porpoising, as we all know about, that violent bouncing of the car that gives you a headache just looking at it. So yeah, I think they're definitely going in the right direction. Even in the space of, we've had what Spain was the 6th race, they were a second behind at the start of the season. Now they're half a second. If they can keep going at that trajectory, there's no reason to think that by the end of the year they won't be right up there fighting, probably causing a few issues in the championship fight, maybe taking some points off here and there and making that battle a bit more interesting. But they themselves, I don't think, will be in it.
All right, Rebecca, great to have you with us. Thanks a million. Cheers.
Cheers.